Hey, Bob, I see a silhouette. It might be from the light coming in from your blinds.
Oh, yeah, that's what it is. Maybe I should.
It's a nice silhouette you have, but
Let me see if I can shut that.
let's see.
That better? How's that?
Yeah, still a silhouette.
Yeah,
Is it is it distracting?
but we can't see the definition of your face, Bob.
If
Do you have a light? Do you have a light that you can turn on in the room?
Yeah. Reason I'm here, normally I'm in my office, but I've been lately on Zoom calls. It's been fading out on me. I think I'm too far from my router back there. That better?
a little bit, yep.
Yes.
Okay.
If you
Yeah,
if you had a little desk lamp that you could turn on, that might help also.
okay, it's dark, huh? Okay, we'll get that going.
Good afternoon, folks.
Good afternoon.
Oh,
Good afternoon.
We getting better?
that's much better. Yes.
Okay. Yeah,
That's
my
good,
office
Bob.
had a Zoom call with NAMI the other day, and about halfway through it said no service.
Hmm.
So I didn't want that to happen today, and I think I'm too far from our router. Router's at one end of the house, and I've been sitting on the other end. Thursday, I'm going to get my first haircut in 3.5 months.
I'm glad I actually cut this is, as you guys know, this is my hair cut short. But got it before all this happened. Now it's getting long again.
I was due before it all happened, so I never had it this long, hanging over my ears.
The shaggy look is back.
You're right. So I think everybody knows where Minneapolis, Minnesota is these days,
Mm,
fortunately.
mm. Still in the thick of it.
Don't know about today. It's been not quiet, but the demonstrations have been going on, but still peaceful.
Mm.
A lot of damage though before that.
Bob and Luke, do you see the Zoom page, the presentation up?
No.
I see where it says share screen, and then I believe I can select my.
Mike, we took the share screen down so that you could do your introduction.
Okay,
And
all
then,
right.
and then when you're finished that, then Luke will share his screen.
Okay, very good. Thank
Okay.
you.
So we have just about everyone here. We might be missing a couple, but we're going to go ahead and get started because we have a packed couple of hours.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Thank you, Alice. And thank you very much for your assistance today as we make our way through this. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Changing the Culture of Construction here. This is our second go at distance learning through the webinar system. We've had about 3 or so Changing the Culture of Construction sessions in Hanover. And obviously, because of the situation that we find ourselves in, we have gone to this distance learning opportunity. And as I'm sure many of us in the IUPAT have had, in continuing to do what we do in moving information through our district council training centers and out to our members. As Alice said, we do have a power-packed 2 hours and 15 minutes or so. We're going to try to wrap up today in about 4 hours and 15 minutes.
2 hours.
I'm sorry, for 2 hours. That woke everybody up, didn't it? Tell the truth now, fellas, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm not getting overtime.
Yeah, there you go. My name is Mike Hines. I am the Western Region Liaison for Labor Management, the LMCI, finishing first. I've also been tasked with heading up the IUPAT Helping Hand Initiative, which we'll discuss a little bit further as we move forward through our session. I think I wrap things up today for everybody. But we have 3 speakers for you today that are going to speak on different subjects. And we also have George Boots, who I'm sure many of you know from DC6. He's the director of training there, and he's going to provide us with a very moving testimony about how our resources for changing the culture and helping hand are serving our members. We also have Mr. Bob Swanson, a retired employer from Swanson Youngdale, as Bob mentioned, from Minnesota, District Council number 82. And Bob's going to discuss with us and talk to us about suicide prevention and mental health issues. And then we have Luke DuBois with us today also. We're very, very pleased to have Luke with us today in presenting our curriculum. Luke's career as a counselor is deeply rooted in a passion for addictions medicine. From his own experience to his impressive career in the treatment of co-occurring disorders, he's dedicated to the mission of recovery. The journey of helping those in the addictions field began a decade ago for Luke and continued while he studied at Salisbury University. During his time there, Luke designed and implemented a substance use education and referral program for the student athletics department. Luke's interrogative blend of health sciences, mentorship, and experimental therapy and clinically based practices helps him address not only substance concerns and underlying mental health disorders, but the treatment of the broader family system. Luke believes it's imperative for the recovering client to be an agent of change within their own recovery process by empowering and leading the clients toward a different perspective. Luke uses his skills to inspire, create change, and empower in the healthiest way possible. Luke's the director of addiction services and clinical supervisor at Tranquility Wood. Luke received his master's as a clinical social worker from the University of Maryland in Baltimore. He received his undergrad in exercise sciences through Salisbury University. He's also a certified alcohol and drug counselor and has lectured and presented at conference, panels, and continuing education events. We were very pleased to have Luke this last year at FIF, and he's a great partner to have with us today. And Luke, thank you for being here. I hand it over to you, sir.
Thanks, Saul. Hey, everybody. How you guys doing? So I'm glad that I see some faces. It's challenging enough for me to do individuals and sessions and groups. As Mike mentioned, I work at a Tranquility Woods. We're an inpatient facility, and we've been able to do our safety precautions, and we are certainly essential, as you guys know, that the disease of addiction and chronic relapse, it doesn't stop. So we've been fortunate to dodge COVID, but also continue to serve needing clients. Of course, we take those safety precautions, and we had to adapt with we do a lot of collaboration with family members, and we had to adapt our family program. Usually they have a family session in person every week and family education in person every Sunday, and we had to do it through this format. So I've had to adapt over the past 3 months, and I'm not a fan of it. So as a therapist and as a counselor, I try to build up that connection and rapport by seeing eyes and faces and body language. And I don't like this Zoom thing, but I'm slowly getting used to it. So as I give my presentation, and Mike or Nicole, when is my hard stop deadline for me, so that way I can keep an eye of it? What time do I stop completely?
Luke, probably until about 2:45.
Great, thank you. So as I talk, I don't want to talk to you or at you the whole time. I don't know how much you guys have been getting that. So there'll be plenty of opportunities where I might ask you some questions, your guys' thoughts and gals' perspectives. So please feel free, if I get going, speak up, because if you got a thought or a question or a perspective on it, I can kind of feed off that. And you know, as this is, Tom Funstein asked me to help train the trainers, and it's quite a vast topic. I've been able to narrow some things that I think has been really important to share with you guys and gals. But the more you guys jump in, I welcome that. Please do so as I go through this process. Okay, so I've got a PowerPoint, but once again, if I do the whole presentation on PowerPoint, I don't get to see you. So I'm going to do my best to show it to you guys. But if you guys speak up, if you ask a question, I believe that I'll see your face come up, and we can go back and forth as we do this. So bear with me. Share screen.
There we are.
Okay, you see it?
Yes.
And I saw you, Mike, so there it goes. So if anyone speaks up, we're good to go. So once again, thanks, Mike, for introducing me. I am the clinical director of addiction services. I oversee the clinical aspects, and I make sure the clients coming in are a good fit with they're appropriate for our facility and then the clinical services. We're considered a small facility. We have 19 clients, and we do really intensive therapy while they're there. So they get all the group aspects, but they also get 3 individual sessions a week. One of them is often family sessions and family education every Sunday. And as Bob will certainly talk about with the dual diagnosis and what that means, in addition to addiction, we have all these other things in terms of mental health, depression, anxiety, bipolar, and all these other mental health diagnoses, in addition to alcohol and other drug disorders. I was fortunate enough, gosh, I don't even know how long it's been when it comes to at the IUPAT, doing an 8-hour class and going, man, I get to help train the trainers. Well, that's a lot of information, right? So what I'm going to try to do for the next 30, 40 minutes is give you some of the physiology, the brain aspects of what is this thing and what does it mean for when it comes to working conditions. And if someone does go get help or seeks treatment or work on their recovery or abstinence or any other word that you want to look at, use, what does that mean when they come back and long term? So one thing that we often hear that this is an addiction, this is a brain disease. So I'm going to hopefully identify with you guys and gals any questions that you might have. But in addition to that, what does this mean in terms of the physiological aspects and how it affects me as someone, being a trainer? What are some things that I should be mindful of or it's important to pass down because of that? We hear quite a bit that this is a brain disease. So my first question to you guys and gals is just that. When you guys hear that this is a disease, this is a brain disease, what does that mean to you guys? What does that mean? It's a disease. Any thoughts or questions on that? And if you disagree, it's a disease. I want to hear that too. Thoughts?
100%. It's actually wholeheartedly, it's a disease. It's a misunderstood disease because of it's very similar to that of schizophrenia. It's a mental disorder and a mental path of which people take and not realizing that they're needing outside solutions and sources to fulfill needs in their own mind where they don't feel good enough themselves.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Any other perspectives? Do we have a counter argument? Does anyone feel that it's not a disease?
Is it the chemical imbalance that they just don't have certain chemicals that they need to make the right decisions?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think these are both of the things that you guys just mentioned are two examples of two things. It gives someone dis-ease as a result of the damage that it's doing. But there's a lot of definitions of a disease. One is it's a disorder of a structure or function. So if you think about someone that is a epidemiologist or they study root causes or why does someone have a disease, with the brain, people often get frustrated. So whether it's substance use disorder or mental health disorder, people tend to get angry at it. So with other diseases, could be caused by infection or inflammation or environmental factors or genetics or inflammation. But when we talk about the brain, usually this organ, more than any organ, there's a stigma. Me and Bob talk about this frequently, but if someone has other chronic diseases, chronic meaning long lasting, if someone has a congestive heart failure, people don't get overly angry saying, man, they should have exercised more and had better nutrition. Or someone that has diabetes, and just because they're taking insulin dependent, people don't get angry if they eat a lot of sugar the way they do with the brain. So out of all the organs, I feel like the brain itself is there's still a stigma. And I think that we're slowly beginning to change out of that because everyone is affected or knows someone that is affected by this thing. One of the statistics is 1 out of 4 Americans will have a drug disorder. Doesn't mean that it's a disease, but have a negative effect by it. And that's what we're going to talk about today is what does that mean in terms of...
Luke,
yes.
I'd like to chime in a little bit there. I think the biggest stigma that it does exist in regards to addiction and substance abuse, and a lot of people are confused when we're talking about addiction. A lot of people focus directly to substance abuse, where the other addictions, whether it be work, whether it be gambling, whether it be eating disorders, or whatever it is, what tends to be misunderstood is that what they're using, whether it be any substances, whether it be any whatever failed solutions that they're using, they're just the symptom of the disease. Mm-hmm. Excessive drinking, excessive drug use is a symptom of the disease. The disease is a disease of the mind. And I think that's where a lot of the stigma does actually come in.
Let me try to explain that a little bit with this picture. That's a great segue. You know, with any addiction, whether it's substance use, gambling, sex addiction, food addiction, there's this part of the brain. And if we look at this picture, when I share this, can you guys see that PowerPoint? The brain cut in half. So this is an example of the brain that's cut between your eyes, through your nose, and that's what you're seeing. So the brain is affected from top to bottom. That's how it's damaged. So before the brain is damaged, why does anyone use substances or have sex or really enjoy food? It feels good. So there's a part of the brain called the pleasure center. And that is where there's these things that make us feel good called neurotransmitters. And that's just a fancy word for feel-good chemicals. Okay, so dopamine is an example that is typically released with all substances, but dopamine is a neurotransmitter that is released during sex, food, exercise, things like that. So it feels good. So why would anyone, and that really drives our behaviors. The pleasure center part of the brain does a real good job of going, okay, I like that pleasure. It's a stimuli. Let's keep doing it. So the reason why, let's say, sex addiction, right? With sex addiction, someone may, have sex and really like it, and that leads to masturbation, but that level of stimulation isn't good enough. So what happens is people become more risky with that to release more pleasure, more dopamine, because it reaches a level of, okay, if I'm masturbating all the time, if I'm having sex with my wife, that isn't enough for me. So then that pleasure center goes, I need more dopamine. So that's when people get riskier. So that's either with sex and all of a sudden become infidelity or much more riskier, and then more dopamine's released. So that happens with addictions that might not damage the brain in the same way that substance abuse does. So when we think about the brain, once again, I'll take you to the frontal lobe. And if you look at that, there's a whole lot of things, too much. Let me simplify it for you. If you see that frontal lobe, I always say it's this part of the brain. We've been given the gift to forward think. So forward thinking, that's part of planning. It's that executive and logical brain. So what happens when we continue to use substances, not only are we releasing dopamine and that feel good, we start to damage the part of their brain that makes logic and sense and reason out of things. And that's an issue. So when we look at a 12-step recovery and the Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, they say it in a non-medical way. They say it in a 12-step way. They say that we admitted we were powerless over drugs and alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. Well, what has become unmanageable are our ability to specifically use this planning, this logic and reasoning. Now, while you're at work, you guys might see people whose logic or rationalization is becoming more and more distorted and unhealthy. Well, there's a reason for that, because we're damaging that part of the brain as addicts and alcoholics. So all substances, if you use the amount you do for the amount that we use, it will, whether it's, let's say, alcohol, when we consume so much, it takes this liver, right? And we got these kidneys and we got these organs that's supposed to break down this alcohol. It can't. So that way the liver can no longer filter the alcohol out. So then it becomes poisonous. The liver goes, okay, I got nothing else I can do. And it breaks the blood-brain barrier and it starts to smother the brain and poison the brain. When you take cocaine and it's a quick access to the blood vessels in the brain, when you smoke it, it goes to the lungs and then lungs to the brain. And then all of a sudden we are damaging, first and foremost, the logical part of our brain. So if we continue to use, that's why it's called progression. Now remember, we got the stimulus that's telling us it feels good, I like it, I want more of it. Now, negative things might start to happen at work, at home, with legal system, with relationships, but we start to wire our brain to condition ourselves that, man, this pleasure center is so important to me that the logical part of the brain that does pros and cons and negativity and is this worth it, that becomes less and less and less and less with every substances, but especially with the ones that are mind altering, mood altering, with not just the pleasure center, but with the damage in the brain. So after we damage I got about 20 minutes. All right. So after we damage that part of the brain, then once again, top to bottom, there's this middle place part of the brain, the midbrain. And as you see here, that's, for example, the hippocampus, the memory, that's amygdala, the basic emotions. So we take in information, we're doing our daily lives, our progression of substance use gets more, and all of a sudden how we begin to remember things and store those memories begin to get distorted too. And we begin to convince ourselves that I'm pretty good, I'm okay. I can make this rationalization that my work performance isn't getting worse. And then all of a sudden my boss that's angry at me, I can rationalize and minimize and stay in denial. And this progression continues to happen. But while this is happening, I always give the example that if this affects the emotional part of our brain, now granted we're rough and tough, and whether you're a guy or a gal, and let's put your bootstraps on and we'll just keep trudging and we'll keep going. Well, guess what? We're not robots. Some of us might like to think that we are. So this substance helps me feel even better if I'm feeling good, but the substance also really helps me if I'm not feeling good and I need to feel different. So let me use these substances so I can change how I'm feeling. So the progression is we start to damage the emotional part of our brain. So I always say, me being in Baltimore, the Ravens won, let's go get messed up. The Ravens lost, let's go get messed up. And we begin to condition ourselves to need it, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally as well. So you see how this disease begins to happen. And if we look at it as disease, where environmental factors are playing a role, our behaviors, our physiological, and all of a sudden the choice goes out the way, goes out the picture. It doesn't become a choice anymore at some point. And that's the progression. Lastly, we got the logical part of the brain, the memory and emotion. And then lastly, the lower part of the brain, if you look at the brainstem, it says body basics. So this is part of the brain that's responsible for things that you don't have to think about, like vitals, breathing, heart rate, blinking, things like that, even swallowing. But this is also part of the brain that I kind of call the survival brain. So a lot of people think I'm not an addict, I'm not an alcoholic because, I still have a job. I haven't thrown anything away yet. I still have my family. I'm not that Skid Row brum that's brown bagging under the bridge, or, that I can't be an addict or an alcoholic. But what often happens when I'm at Tranquility Woods, and people begin to realize when they stop using and they got some dry time and some detox time away from the substances, that they realize that, okay, I could be dead, or I could have been dead. I did drink and drive or use and drive. I put my children at risk. I operated machinery in an altered state. Just because I haven't lost everything yet, it's a case of the yes, and they say that's an acronym for you're eligible too. Just because it haven't directly happened to you in that moment, it very well could have. And that's often people's first realization, if not a boss telling them, if you don't seek treatment, you're fired, or a loved one saying, if you don't get help, me and the kids are gone, or whatever, what have you. And those ultimatums certainly become more real. And that way I don't have to use that logical part of my brain because it's right here in front of me. And they're saying, oh man, I got to keep using, or I got to stop. They mean business. I can't rationalize and manipulate that anymore. There's an expression that I sometimes say, as we damage the brain, as an addict, one part of the brain sells bullshit, the other part of the brain buys bullshit. But that's not too far-fetched because we see how the brain is damaged. Now, interesting enough, as the brain is damaged top to bottom, it begins to heal bottom up. So the thing that comes back first is that survival part. Well, where we are in the progression of the disease, for some people is, okay, instead of that liquid diet, I want 3 square meals and I'm ready to eat. It can look like survival in terms of, okay, I've got the ultimatum of I can't provide for my family, I'm losing my jobs, or I'm going to go to jail, or I want a roof over my head. That's part of the survival. So that kind of wakens back up, and then their priority seems to be, I'm fearful I'm going to lose my job. I was late, or my urinalysis was positive for a certain substance, and I know you want me to focus on my recovery, but I need to focus on my job. That's my biggest stressor. Now the issue is, these are right after the survival comes back, that's when the memory and emotions begin to kind of spark and come alive. So that's when that emotional roller coaster really begins to happen. But the issue is with the stimuli, that pleasure part of the brain, that the coping skill becomes substances. So how do I make sense of a frustrated boss, or a pissed off husband, or an irritated wife, or a friend or a family member that's angry at me, when I haven't really been processing these things in a way that's healthy because I've been relying on substances? And remember, the part of the brain that comes back last is the logical brain. So one of the reasons why, you know, I've said this for a lot of our clients and family members, I'm used to dealing with the pandemic. We know substances are an epidemic. We know that it's worldwide, that it's a pandemic. So now I've got a lot of clients that are dealing with two pandemics, and this stress is unbelievable because for 3 or 4 months, therapists weren't seeing their clients in their offices. Intensive outpatient facilities weren't open unless, you know, eventually they became telehealth like we're doing now. So it's the rate of substance abuse has skyrocketed because the amount of stress and the inability to make logic or cope with that. You don't have to be an addict to what we're all going through to realize this is hard to cope with. And we're all going through different stages of that emotional roller coaster, and our brain might not be damaged like people with addictions. The issue with substance abuse, because of that rewiring the circuitry and how we think and feel and act and react, is for other people may do unhealthy coping skills and behaviors, but for an addict, because of that brain, and especially in those 6 to 24 months, relapse is so high because the brain has not learned to process those thoughts because it's still damaged. The brain hasn't learned new coping skills to find a different stimulus than the powerful synthetic form of drugs and alcohol that we were putting in our brain as addicts. So that is a big reason why that relapse is so chronic. A lot of people ideally would like to, you know, whether they get in trouble from work, or now we've got this program where we have, you know, through the IUPAT and the IFTIs, that people becoming more educated and aware of that it's okay to really changing the culture, and it's okay to seek help. And I know you just, you know, want to seek therapy, but from what you're saying, maybe you would benefit from, you know, 12-step meetings and an IOP, or, you know, you're in a safe place that I think we can work with the EAP and, you know, take a month or two to get the help that you need, and then continue treatment and outpatient and therapist after that, because we're seeing how the brain's damaged. And unfortunately for a lot of people in this medical world is quick fix. And we're seeing with brain disorder and brain disease, the brain can take up to 2 years to really begin to regenerate and heal itself. Well, that's one reason why this is an epidemic and a pandemic. To think that to go back in these environments that people were going into, the family, the stress, the workplaces, and then think that you're no longer going to use after 20 days, 30 days, and you'll be fine. Well, they're trying to use this part of the brain and process these things. My example was I'm 14 years sober. I was either a really good or really bad alcoholic. I had to seek treatment at 20 years old. And I took a semester off school. I didn't want to. They told me to do it. I did it. And then I went back to school. And I remember going back to school, and my first paper was due. And I picked up that book and I started to read it. And I read that book and I read that paragraph. And you know, nothing in that paragraph sank in. So I said it out loud. And I tried to absorb those words on that paper. Now, I used to do papers all the time, smoking pot, taking a few shots, taking someone else's Adderall. I wanted to buzz while I took my paper and did I took pride in not being a stereotypical addict or alcoholic. I could do my work. But now that I'm a semester removed and then back in there, I'm trying to read these words on this paper and it wouldn't absorb. So I said it out loud, it didn't absorb. And then all of a sudden my stress level goes up. So then my logic is, okay, I have to get this paper done. It's due tomorrow. So my first logical part, my rationalization was, let me go down the hallway. I know there's a guy that has Adderall. I'm not going to snort it like a stimulant. I'm not going to smoke or drink on it. I'm going to take it as prescribed, and I'll be okay, and I'll get the paper done. Now, that was my logic. Luckily, I didn't do that. I called my sponsor in the 12-step fellowship. He said, well, you're not going to be, first of all, don't do that, because you've tried that before, and you know you're not prescribed it, and it's a stimulant, and there's some other things that you should take, then that won't be like a stimulant for your brain, because you did that before, and then you started smoking and drinking, and you relapsed on it. So your ideas got you here. Maybe you better stop using this. Luckily, across the street, there was a 12-step meeting. I went to the meeting. I participated in telling them what was going on. I was there for about an hour and a half. I walked right across the street where my dorm was. And for some reason, I was in a different mind state. My stress was down, and I was able to read and write that paper. But 3 to 6 months after I stopped using, when I went back to school, things weren't second nature to me. And that's often what happens when people go to an inpatient facility like Tranquility Woods and think, I know you want me to do an outpatient program because you think it'll help me with my day-to-day stuff, and there's stressors that I'm not even aware at. And I often do a group here where I talk to the clients, like, who's going to go back to work? Who's going to go back to school? And I give examples of other people that I've worked with that where they're working under a car and things they didn't have to think about, all of a sudden they're struggling with because their brain got used to working in an altered state. Now, they might not have been high, but the chemicals were still in their brain. And after 30, 60 days removed, their brain is trying to learn how to rewire and think and process things in a different way, and it wasn't there yet. So it began to really, one of my callings is to help people to realize more treatment, more treatment, more treatment. We can't just put a Band-Aid on this thing just because not everybody knows the damage of what it does to the brain. It takes time to heal. It doesn't get this way overnight. It doesn't get better overnight. Let's see where else we got. So we talked about this. A fancy term that we call that is post-acute withdrawal syndrome. So if we think of acute withdrawal, that is the detox phase. Those are the things that happen when someone stops using for 5 to 7 days, and they go through detox. Sweats, chills, aches, vomitings, vitals, blood pressure goes up, bone aches. But then after the detox, people are going through what I just explained, which is these are things after the detox. So these are a group of things that happen after that, and they can take up to 2 years. So these are things that I kind of summed up just by talking to you guys. It's the inability to think clearly. Well, that part of the brain, the logical part of the brain, is damaged. Our memory is highly affected, and some people go, nope, my memory's good, so that must not relate to me. But until you're in this organic environmental setting, we don't really realize what really happens. And what I often see in treatment and in my outpatient settings that people are often in for 6 months after their last use, that these memories start to come back in a way that how did I forget that? You know, they just kind of have these like brain zaps of memory going that they didn't even realize was in their conscience. That emotional overreaction or numbness, I call it, it's an emotional roller coaster. And I say using is the ups and downs like this. In recovery, you still have ups and downs, but your progression with treatment and recovery is like that. We're not robots. We get to that between, but instead of avoiding the mad, the sad, the discomfort, in recovery, people get to emotionally learn how to cope with that and not need a substance to numb that out. Sleep disturbances, that's a big one. I feel for the people that have sleep disturbances more than the detox, because detox, you're going to get through it. You're going to shake and bake and feel discomfort. But because remember, we're smothering and poisoning the brain, we are detoxifying the brain, that there's 2 waves of sleep, slow wave and rapid eye movement, slow wave and rapid eye movement. When we use substances, people typically don't get that REM sleep. Well, we need both of them. So when we don't get that REM, that whole pass out and come to, or wake up and come to, that's kind of what is happening for a lot of people with substances. If you use a couple hours before you go to bed, it can affect your rapid eye movement cycle. Now, there's a lot of social drinkers that drink every night and all that stuff, and they wonder why they can't sleep without it. Well, you're affecting your rapid eye movement sleep because you're entering the brain. So that can take people months before that comes back in a healthy way. And sleep is good for two things. The immune system, it boosts your immune system. When you got the flu, what do? You want to sleep. Your body shuts down to help your immune system. But sleep is very important for stress. Many times I've been frustrated at my bosses or people that I work with or my significant other, my wife, and then I go to bed and come to I'm not nearly as stressed. So it can have that positive effect on that as well. Physical coordination, and to me the most important one is that stress and anxiety sensitivity, and hopefully you see why with the brain.
How do we convince somebody that that stuff is going to come back before they start using again?
Isn't that the holy grail? I wish I had an easy answer for you. One of the things that I enjoy doing is help giving people perspective, which is what I'm doing for you guys and gals now. I'm giving you guys perspective. I'm giving you insight, and I do my best to set up conditions for help people realize even though this is a form of treatment and you might have some discomfort this way, it's so worth it, right? So as many different ways as us as friends, as coworkers, as coaches, as support, it's all I can do is give them. I can't make anybody do anything, right? I would burn out. I always laugh at my title. My title is Director of Addiction Services. Well, that's like Director of Unmanageability. That's like Director of Trying to Herd Cats. So I could go batty if I see half my clients either not taking the suggestions or not making those changes. My job is to set up the conditions for that healing to happen and be an advocate and be a support and not slow that for someone and really hopefully increase their chances whatever way I can, which is usually through healthy communication support and an open arms and door or boundaries, right? So sometimes we do ultimatums or boundaries because what you're doing or not doing is affecting me, is affecting my business, is affecting your coworkers, and I'm not okay with that. So there's a few ways to do that. What can I do about pause? Stay in touch with support, really identify the emotional states. It's, some people are certainly triggered by the good things. Absolutely. Because remember, addiction makes good things even better. But that discomfort, what I call emotional sobriety, being aware of what I'm actually feeling and how do I work through what I'm feeling, good or bad, that's a huge recovery piece, long-term recovery aspect. That structure and daily routine is a good thing. Some people do strive and thrive when they get out of treatment because with work, because if there is a supportive environment, if they do understand that they might not be as good as they were even when they were using at first because of the physiological changes and the processing that's going on. But that daily routine and structure to creating what is normal, or I'll say what is healthy, working can be healthy. Healthy supports is healthy. And while you're doing your treatment, your therapy, your spiritual program, your 12-step program. And this is for everyone involved because everyone's affected by this disease. Is we have to have patience and understanding, and that's part of what I wanted to show you guys as you guys are and gals are the examples for helping others. It's some of these things that we see makes no sense, but at least we know why some of their behaviors don't make sense now. It's because of the brain damage. 12 steps say in a different way. Step 2 says, keen to believe a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So it's the 12-step model and the medical model are actually parallels. Allow time to care for your spiritual self and do things to bring health and comfort. Spiritual aspect is a big thing for a lot of people. It's an unbelievable support and coping skill. And if we're seeing that we don't have some control because of organic brain damage, then something else to support us is certainly a benefit. Continuing treatment. I think they're going to see the airport, the flight pilots, they have one of the biggest success rates when it comes to treatment and recovery, because when one reason, as soon as if they're drinking or positive on the job or things like that, you're risking a lot of people. But in addition to that, their treatment, their EAP program is up to a year or longer. And because of that long-term treatment model they have, the success rate of relapse and chronic relapsing is a lot less, because they mandate if you want to keep your job, you have to do this for an entire year of treatment and therapeutic process. So continuing treatment is just going to be a huge aspect. Questions, thoughts, takeaways?
Yeah, Luke, Colin here, DC 39. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I just took some notes here, some things that I have noticed growing up in a household with, in my family, being around addictions. I guess the one question I want to ask is, it's about triggers and advertisement. Do you feel, or do you know, that in 1980 to 2020, where would you say it's more difficult to recover in 2020 than it would be in 1980? Like, I'll give you my thoughts on that.
Okay.
I was speaking with a brother of mine that was VLT user, gambling addict, and I remember driving in the truck with him, and he had said this, can you change your ringtone on your phone? And this is around the time where he was, not wanting to partake in the VLTs. And I said, well, why does it annoy you so bad? And we got into a bit of an argument. And he said, because it reminds me of one of my favorite games. And then I started to put things together, and I started to make the assumption, I guess, in my own mind, that in 1980, advertisement probably wasn't at the level it is in 2020. But when it comes to these type of addictions, taking the VLT addiction, which is like sensory with pictures and stuff, say it's like street lights or dogs barking or bells and whistles, we hear them in everyday life. And I realized that, okay, he's upset that they have this ringtone. I didn't understand at first, but understanding that that these things are triggers for him. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, my belief is in 1980, probably a little bit different. I shouldn't say easier or more difficult, but different to recover than in 2020. What are your thoughts on that?
I'll give you 3. One is I don't know. The other 2 is I'll give you how it might. There could be examples for both between 1980 and 2020. And I know I'm wrapping out of time here. The services in 2020, there's so many more services and opportunities, whether it's treatment options, support groups, awareness in a lot of places than there were in 1980, right? So there may be more benefits of options to get help in 2020 than there was in 1980. Now, on the flip side, in 1980, the access to services certainly weren't as much, but we got to put in context. You know what I mean? So, I often hear heroin addicts say, I would hate to be an alcoholic. Even though you can use your first time, and I always say heroin addicts don't have a luxury to hit a bottom anymore, because they could die right away their first time on heroin and fentanyl. But they said, okay, I can eventually change my environment and the drug users, but alcoholics, oh my God, every corner, every commercial, every magazine, and all that stuff, that's only increased over the past 20 years, So it's all in context, it's so whatever's harder, I don't know. But for my clients, it's not an excuse. Services and support and putting yourself as, your primary focus has to be your recovery, and people struggle with that because of all those life things, and how do you make this your primary focus when there's so many variables, and I'm sure cases can be made for both. So I don't know if I answered it, but perspective, I guess.
Should I chime in on that?
Please.
Name's Donald, District Council 46, Local 1819. Today's day and age is a lot different than, we can't compare 1980 to 2020. But the one thing that's different today that I would say is drastically different from 1980 is the amount of communication that needs to take place, especially for somebody in early recovery. When you're trying to reach out, we have phones on our hips now, and everybody's got them, so you can have direct contact at all times. If you needed to contact your sponsor, you don't have to wait for a pager or a certain time for somebody to get home and get off work and get on a corded phone. We have direct access to people today. I think that's a big piece that wouldn't have existed in 1980, which allows us to have that. I watched a TED Talk not too long ago about how we all think about addiction is wrong. And one of the misconceptions of addiction being the opposite of addiction is connection, and it's connection with other people, because we as humans have a natural bonding ability. We'll bond with whatever it is we're going to bond with, whether it be our family, whether it be our friends. And if we are feeling disconnected from that, we're going to bond with something, and then from there, it could either be shopping or drugs or alcohol, or we're going to bond with something. We have a natural net to be able to connect with somebody. So having it in today's day and age in 2020, where no matter where we are, we're here in the middle of COVID-19, and we lost a lot of the guys from the rooms have lost connection. They don't have that face-to-face connection with people anymore. And with that, we now have the ability to have Zoom or have other platforms where we still get to have that communication, have that connection with people. So I think today, easier or harder in where recovery lies, I find that some of the substances that are out there are a lot worse than they were in 1980. But here we are, we have a different level of connection today, as long as everybody's using it in that standpoint.
Yeah, I had to really talk to a lot of people that isolation can't mean lack of connection. It means a different form of connection, but that's you're right on, absolutely.
That's why I feel that we use the wrong term in COVID-19. I don't believe it is isolation. It is quarantine, not isolation. Isolation is in your mind, not a physical distancing from somebody.
Yeah, we'll see. Thank you, guys. I don't want to take up on Bob's time, so I appreciate you letting me being part of this process.
Thanks, Lou.
Afternoon, everybody. Bob Swanson. I'm a retired painting contractor. Been retired for about 5 years. I spent 45 years in the industry, and proud to be way back in my early career a member of Painters Union in Minneapolis 386. The last 25 years of my career, I had the privilege to lead Swanson Youngdale, a national painting and now drywall contractor also. That is not why I'm here today. I am a suicide loss survivor. We lost our oldest son, Michael, he died by suicide at age 33 on March 13th, 2009. And what I hope to talk about today, and I'm open for your questions and comments as Luke was, going to talk about mental illness, going to talk about why we look at that different than physical illnesses. We're going to talk about suicide in our industry. We're going to talk about warning signs or clues to suicide. But most importantly, I'm going to end the conversation with what you can do about it. So I'm not a trained professional in this business. I've learned a lot in our son's journey, and I've learned a lot since then. I've been very active in National Alliance on Mental Illness. It's called NAMI. And I'm also have certification to teach a program called QPR, Question, Persuade, Refer, which is a suicide prevention program. So we can move on to the next slide. So what's an illness? All it is a condition of being unhealthy in your body or mind. It's a specific condition that prevents your body or mind from working normally. It's nobody's fault. Nobody wants any illness, especially mental illnesses. But here's the key. They're all treatable. Remember that. All illnesses, including mental illnesses, are treatable. Next slide. So there's a lot of similarities between physical and mental illnesses. One, many of these illnesses, both physical and mental, are difficult to diagnose. Many times they're co-occurring. Luke mentioned people in his facility also have various mental illnesses. You can have physical illnesses, of course, and mental illnesses. There's a range of severity. You can have a very mild case or a very severe case. There's also side effects from the medication that we take. If all of us, I would assume, are taking some form of medication. I know I have some, and there's side effects to everything we ingest in our body. Another key thing we forget, it's often, Luke mentioned it in recovery. I'll also mention it with as you're living with a mental or physical illness. There's relapses, just part of the illnesses. So it's really critical a person stays on the correct path. The two most common mental illnesses are anxiety disorder and depression. Next slide. So thinking about your reaction, why do we react differently to someone who has a physical illness versus a mental illness? So if someone says, you know, I'm diabetic, what would our reaction be? Oh, that's pretty common. You know, I hope you're taking your insulin. Versus, I'm schizophrenic. Whoa, I don't know about that. What's this problem what's this person gonna be up to? There's fear, there's unknown, really a reaction that's not compassionate at all towards the person. So something I want you to think about is how we refer to illnesses. Terminology is critical. So we typically say he's schizophrenic, he's bipolar. But think about it. Do we ever say he's cancer or he's diabetic? Well, we say he's diabetic, but we frame it so we're compassionate towards the person and not the illness. So what we really should say in both cases, a person's living with cancer, a person's living with anxiety disorder. So see how that changes our attitude? Now we're talking about it's not their fault. All we're talking about is they're living with an illness. And let's be hard on the illness and compassionate towards the person. This will do great wonders in removing the stigma. Mental illnesses, there's a stigma. There's guilt. So think again, what physical illness is somebody feeling it's their fault, or their shame, or their guilt relating to it? None. Mental illnesses carry shame and guilt, and I would submit a big part of that, or a reason for that, is the way we refer to mental illnesses. All they are is illnesses of the brain. Next slide. So here's some common traits of mental illnesses. There's usually more than one illness. Our son lived with 4 illnesses. There's normally regular use of alcohol or drugs. There's also, we found there's regular use typically of tobacco. Lots of anger. And I unfortunately misread our son's anger many times. I took the anger personally, big mistake. The anger was not directed at me. The anger was directed at his illness. Lots of anger as to why can't I get better? Why can't I control this illness? Lots of shame. Can you imagine being ashamed of being ill? He had a great deal of shame. We did also. Questionable decision making. Well, if our brain isn't operating properly, and Luke talked about logic, but even more so if other parts of the brain aren't operating properly, you're not going to make good decisions. So I use the term, a person living with a mental illness is like they're driving a car with a dirty windshield. When our vehicle has a dirty windshield, we can't see well. So our perception of what we see is different than what reality is. Prescribed medications, big issue. But this is with physical illnesses also. When we feel good, we stop taking a medication. When we go to the doctor and a prescription's prescribed and it makes us feel worse, we stop taking the medication. That's true for people with physical illnesses or mental illnesses. So I'll just use myself as an example. Last year, I had a pretty bad infection in one of my feet. Doctor prescribed antibiotic, and it was a heavy antibiotic to take twice a day for 15 days. Well, you know, after 7 days, the swelling was down, the pain was gone. It was a big, big temptation to not take the medication. Similarly, with somebody with a mental illness, could be anxiety disorder. They start taking a medication, they feel better, the temptation's not to take it. So many times people will say, if they were only taking their medication, and put the blame on a person living with a mental illness. They're no different for the same reasons why we stop taking medication with most physical illnesses. So again, I'm trying to compare, there's a lot of similarities. Next slide. So the good news is many, many people live in recovery. They live a good life. About 20% of adults in the United States live with a mental illness. I'm going to say that again. About 20% of the adults in the United States live with a mental illness. And many, many live in recovery. One problem we have, though, because of the shame and the stigma, and because of lack of mental health facilities, and because of lack of psychiatrists, and because of lack of psychologists, only about 60% of the people living with a mental illness will ever get the care they need. So think of that. If we say only 60% of the people with cancer will ever get the care they need, we wouldn't tolerate that. But again, I think it's how we portray mental illness. It's an illness. It's not anybody's fault. And we should demand better treatment and care for people living with these illnesses. So a person in recovery, I just want to use, there's many, but hopefully come fall, we'll have an NFL season. And a person typically in the NFL on Sunday, doing NFL Today, Hall of Fame quarterback. I believe he won 4 Super Bowls with the Pittsburgh Steelers, Terry Bradshaw. And Terry Bradshaw lives with bipolar disorder. He's in recovery. He does very well, but I'm sure he's following his treatment plan. Treatment plan, medications. There needs to be a really tight tolerance, balance of diet, sleep, exercise. They're all really critical for somebody living with a mental illness. So he's one of many examples. You have them working around you every day, but it's never safe to talk about those illnesses. Next slide. So those 20% are working with you every day. They're in church with you. They're at your social outings, but you can't see what's really going on inside. It's just the tip of the iceberg. And why is that? I can tell you that shame plays a big role. If our son was with me today, he would look, big smile on his face, and if you asked him, how you doing? He'd say, fine. So what I really want to get to, as you're trying to help others, just asking them, how you doing, isn't gonna cut it. Because they're gonna say, I'm doing fine. You gotta go at it a whole different way, and I'm gonna talk about that later in the presentation. Next slide. So we've talked about mental illness. want to talk a little bit about suicide. You talk about a crisis, a pandemic, it's suicide. In 2018, we lost over 48,000 Americans to suicide. It's the 10th leading cause of death. Among a big part of our workforce in construction, males 25 to 54, it's the second leading cause of death. 78% of all suicides are males. And the number of suicide deaths have increased over 33% since 1999. In addition, there's estimated that in 2018, there were 1.4 million suicide attempts. So not only has it devastated 48,000 families, it's impacted over 1 million families where there's been an attempt. Again, I would submit the terminology. How do we say it typically? And thankfully it's changing. The person committed suicide. We blame them. It's their fault. They wanted to die. All wrong. The person's illness caused their death. Our son did not want to die. He wanted his pain to end. So I continually say our son died by suicide. So please try to use that terminology. At first, it will be very, very awkward. But a person died from suicide or died by suicide. They did not commit suicide. And it's my opinion, we will not change that number until we quit blaming the person and quit blaming their families. Next slide. So why our industry? We have a problem in our industry. We have more suicides than any other industry. Not something you want to be number one in. Our suicide rate is 4 times the general population. So I was in this industry for 45 years, so I think I can talk to every one of these. It's a tough guy culture. What do I mean? And that's female or male. You got to be tough to make it in our world of construction. Every day is game day. We don't have a slack day. So what I mean by that, you got to perform every day. Just in a sports analogy, every day you got to go out in the field and play your best. If you don't, you may lose your job. So people tough it out. They don't ever want to show their vulnerability. They don't want to ever say, I can't do it today, because then they'll be sidelined from the team and maybe lose their job, maybe look differently at. So because we're a service industry, there's a lot of family separation. I was one that traveled a lot. Our company went where the work was. I think all companies do. And because we're a service industry, that's what you do. But you're away from your home. You're away from your family. You're away from your support system. Maybe you can't get to the doctor because you're on the road. Can't get to your AA group. There's sleep disruption. Again, we're a service industry, and I did this as a contractor many times. Hey, next week I need you to work nights. I'll get later different ways to do that, but that creates havoc, not only in our sleep patterns, but just family life, etc. We're in a physical industry. You do our work 20, 30 years, you develop chronic pain. At first, it's just over-the-counter drugs. Then it's prescribed medication. During that process, it's maybe self-medication. They're all ways to keep showing up every day and get out on the field, do the work. Another one that creates great havoc, no fault of anybody, and these used to be troubling all the time for me. A project got completed. We didn't have enough work for everybody on that project to go to the next one. No fault to anybody, you're laid off. How do you ever deal with that? How do you rationalize that? I did my best and I still don't have a job. In the northern climates, in the fall of the year, we hit that period where there's no outside work. Creates a lot of financial stress. The last one, access to lethal means. So 78% of the suicides are males. One big factor is access to lethal means. We're a industry of outdoors people. Access to firearms is very easy, and that's why we have partly why we have a higher suicide rate. Next slide. So maybe I could ask up to this point, any questions? Okay, let's talk about myths. Because again, we can't understand this until we get some of these myths out of the way. Those who talk about suicide won't do it. Totally false. If somebody's talking about it, they're thinking about it. Say that again. If they're talking about it, they're thinking about it. Take it seriously. Talking to somebody about suicide might put the idea in their head. So if you have this feeling, maybe they're having suicidal thoughts, the fact you have the idea, it's not going to put it in their head because they already have it in their head. But it will free them up to talk about it if you say, hey, I'm concerned about you. Are you having suicidal thoughts? It will open up the communication. Next one, suicidal attempts are just a cry for attention. They're not crying for attention, they're crying for help. So think of this as if somebody was bleeding. Hey, help me, I'm bleeding. It's that cry for help, but they don't know how to say it because of the shame. How do you say to somebody, I'm having suicidal thoughts? It's just not an easy thing to say. Last one, once a person has a suicidal plan, they cannot be stopped. Again, this is not true. So let's think about every human action. Every human action has three parts to it. Idea, which we call ideation. Plan, which we call the plan, developing a plan of how you're going to do it. And then action, you take action. So think about anything you do during the day. There's an idea, a plan, action. In construction, the idea is somebody's coming up with the idea of a building. The plan is the blueprints. And the action is that first backhoe digging the hole. So something you want to think about is one, people that have survived an attempt, they've interviewed many of these people, and 50% have said that the period from ideation to action was less than an hour. So when a person's talking about suicide, and we'll go through the clues, there's not a lot of time allowed. You can't say, well, I'll give them a call tomorrow, or I'll deal with it next week. That could be way too late. There's urgency to all this. The other piece I want to really stress, remember I said that all mental illnesses are treatable, all suicides are preventable, and you can play a role in that. Next slide. So there's a lot of clues or warning signs, whatever term you want to use. These are examples, there's many, but I want to just give you a brush at some verbal clues, there's behavioral clues, there's situational clues. So what are some verbal clues? So again, they're not going to be direct, they're kind of oblique. I wish I were dead. I'm tired of life. I'm a burden to everyone. Soon you won't have to worry about me. That losing hope, feeling of being a burden, just really in a very despairing state. Take these seriously. They're all cries for help. Next slide. Behavioral clues. So maybe you are noticing some verbal clues, hearing them, but maybe you're seeing some behavioral clues. Common ones, withdrawing from family and friends, moodiness, hopelessness, unexplained anger. Person's changing. Some of this doesn't make any sense. Putting personal affairs in order, giving away prized possessions, acquiring a gun or stockpiling pills. Just now, again, losing hope. I can't go on. Next slide. Situational clues. So sometimes just situations become that trigger. And these are all critical every day, but today even more so. Loss of a job, loss of a major relationship, diagnosis of a terminal illness, loss of family member or friend by suicide, which is especially true with youth. With youth, we always worry about the copycat suicide. Arrest and loss of freedom. So not only losing hope, but losing control of my life. It's out of control. Who wouldn't today feel somewhat out of control with the pandemic that we've all been living with? So here's a startling statistic. In 2015, the Center for Disease Control studied all suicide deaths. 29% occurred within 2 weeks of a life-changing event. 29%. So think about all of you, we're in an industry, people get laid off. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of stability in our industry. Think of just even when COVID hit, all the thousands of construction workers that were laid off, no fault of their own. How do you deal with that? That's a critical period of time. Or you hear somebody's going through a divorce, or they've lost a loved one. These are critical periods in our lives. Really needs some attention. More so than, hey, how you doing? Just, we got to talk deeper than that. Next slide. So let me walk through some steps that, how do you deal with all this? So I'm going to just use some examples. Let me tie it to safety, because this is a safety and health issue. So think about an injury on the job site. How do we deal with that? First, we assess, is this first aid or is this call 911? Obviously, if it's a finger cut, we go to the first aid kit and address the issue and then move on. On the other hand, if somebody's lost a couple fingers, that's going to be a 911 call. Stop the bleeding and at the same time call 911. So as you become aware of situations through seeing those verbal clues, seeing behavior change or a situation, so initially you got to just assess. And then the prescription or what you prescribe or help the person to get will dictate the seriousness of the situation. Because of shame and because of guilt, this is a one-on-one conversation. This is not in front of a group. Convey your concern. So let me just start off a possible conversation. And I'll use myself. Hey, Bob, lately we've been hearing comments you've been making that really concern us, that you're just a burden to everybody. And you're not the guy you used to be. You're moody and you've been missing work. And it just doesn't seem like you're the same guy. Can we talk a little bit? I'm concerned about you. And we all have periods of life we go through. And I just want to make sure we can talk a little bit about it and we'll see what's going on. And I'm here to help you. I'm here for you. I want things to be better than they were. This is concerning me. Listen without any judgment. You're going to hear things that don't even make sense. And the easy thing to say, because especially males, we're fixers. So the person might say, I'm a worthless piece of crap and I'm just no good and nobody cares about me. I'd be just as good as dead. The easy thing to say is, I don't know how you can say all that stuff. You're a valuable union member, you're foreman, you're running that big project. You got so much to live for. Don't go there because it's not going to do any good. It's going to stop the conversation. Listen without judgment. Then kind of depending upon the severity of things, you want to stay with the person. And easy out there too is let's call the EAP. Here's the number and give them a call tonight and let's talk. And if things don't get better, you want to do is, how about if we call the EAP and I'm going to be here right with you. And I know it's not the easiest thing to do, but I've got the number right with me and let's call them right now. Again, you're with them. You're helping them. We all need somebody when we're in crisis to help us. If it's more, you're really concerned, the person's showing evidence of maybe wanting to end their life, then you need to look around. Are there lethal means? Maybe you've shown up at their house and they're in a crisis situation. You want to make sure there's no lethal means within easy access. Then you're really stressing as you've been going along. Let's get some help. How about if we call the suicide hotline? Or how about if we call your local crisis center? And I'll be here with you. And I'll go with you. Again, it's a lonely journey to take that on all by yourself. And then have resources available so you can provide the assistance they need and want. Now, if it's a crisis situation where it's clear that potential loss of life is possible, you want to, at that point, call 911. But here's a key thing. Ask for a crisis intervention team, or CIT team. Police departments around the country are trained in how to handle mental health crisis. So that's something you want to ask for. I've provided some training to the police, law enforcement, and in Minnesota, I believe to get their certification, they're required to have 40 hours of training in mental health support. And I've just been one of the speakers, but many speakers will guide them along and give them resources. As far as an easy resource, the suicide hotline is 1-800-273-8255 or TALK, 1-800-273-TALK. It's a 24/7 service. There's trained mental health professionals. And in most states, once they get talking with the person, they'll click over to your local crisis center. It's a very valuable resource. Hopefully, I did read in NAMI's information recently, there's a federal bill right now in Congress, and hopefully it gets passed, where there will be a short 3-digit number to call for any mental health crisis. So I hope in the next year that will become a reality. In the meantime, 1-800-273-TALK, or if you text, it's home 741-741. Text home 741-741. Now the key is you make the call, but you want the individual to be on the call. So, and again, stay with the individual. So I had a personal experience in my office once where I did refer a person to the EAP, but I made the call with them and actually took them to the resource that was available. And I could honestly say that night I could rest because I knew the person was getting the care they needed. Versus just referring them, are you really going to know they're getting the care they need? And then you're going to worry what's really going on. So these all require urgency. Okay. Any questions on that process? Next slide. Question about a Canadian hotline. I'm not aware of that, but I will research that and get that to the IUPAT. Good question. Okay, next slide. Stuck? Okay, the next slide is you can make a difference. So let me explain that. And I'm just going to use a couple examples. I made a presentation like this at Swanson Youngdale, after I retired. And about 6 months later, a very good employee of Swanson Youngdale, early in the morning, prior to work hours, left a text with his supervisor. And the text just said, "I can't do it anymore." The supervisor was smart enough to know this is something serious. It's a verbal clue. He went to his supervisor. They made contact after a pretty extensive amount of time and said to the employee, "Where are you?" He told him where he was. They found him in his car in an empty parking lot, and he had the idea, he had the plan, and they had the means to end his life. By taking that quick action, they stopped a suicide from happening. They got the person the help he needed, and he's still alive, number one, and number two, he's still a valuable employee of Swanson Youngdale. So see how urgent that was? What if somebody had just said, I don't know what heck his problem is. We'll deal with that later. You just can't do that. You got to follow your heart, follow that gut instinct, and just say, I don't like and now, what if nothing was wrong? Then at least you know that you did the right thing. And you at least challenged, and you at least confirmed how valuable and how much you cared about that employee. So either way, it's a win-win. So how do we change the culture? And of course, that's the whole focus of this thing. I'm going to use myself. We change the culture by creating wellness is a priority. Safety and health is a priority. So in my 45 years, I'm going to use safety. And early on in my career, large projects, it was stated we're going to have so many fatalities during this project. We quit doing that a long time ago. It's unacceptable. Then in about the 1980s, early 90s, we said we don't want any more injuries. Period. There's no reason to have injuries in our industry. So we started the zero injury. Now we've even graduated to zero misses. So my point is, when we made it a priority, we have changed our culture as far as safety. It's no longer acceptable to have deaths. It's no longer acceptable to have injuries. It's no longer acceptable to have near misses. We did that by education. We did that by looking out for each other. We did that by staying on task. In my opinion, we can do the same thing with suicides in our industry. Why are we number one? I told you some of the reasons. We need to deal with that. So change the culture, make wellness a priority. Make openness and support a priority. Where we talk about these things. We acknowledge them first, and then we talk about them. Training regarding soft skills. We're great at technical skills, but soft skills not so great. And this is partly soft skills. What's really going on inside people? Seeking resources of support. It's okay to ask for help. We're an industry where typically in all the years I've been in it, it's not okay to ask for help. We got to quit that. Then we treat physical and mental wellness the same. So in my presentations, I use something called Old Bob, New Bob. Old Bob, let me use some examples. And I'm not super proud of this, but it's the industry I knew at the time. An employee who was struggling, an employee who wasn't showing up to work, an employee who wasn't doing good work. Bring them in the office. You know, I don't know what's going on with you. Your performance has really gone downhill. You're not showing up to work. Unless something changes, I'm going to have to let you go. So if you want to keep working here, you better get your crap together. That, unfortunately, I've said to many employees. And I think many of you as instructors and union reps have probably done the same. So what was the net effect of that? A person with some issues lost their job and maybe left our industry, or maybe bounced around and just did not have a good path, and their issues didn't get addressed. So new Bob had an employee that I can see in my mind was going that route. And I said, let's talk about it. What's going on? He knew it was safe to talk about it. I said, number one, I want you to stay as an employee. So I laid that out. Number two, I don't want to lay you off. Number three, if something doesn't change, I'm going to have to lay you off. Let's talk about it. What's going on? And he told me what was going on. And believe it or not, this is some issues that were way back in his early life that were dragging him down. We got him the help he needed. And I can say proudly, his performance changed immensely. His attitude towards his family and himself changed immensely. He was dragging around that burden of he was worthless for a lot of reasons. And he had a lot of health issues because of it. So we said, over a period of time, and obviously he had to do some of the work too. So here's another issue. When a person's got a physical injury in this business, we take exceptions and make means to help them get back to work. We call it light duty. But if somebody goes into Luke's facility for a period of time, what do we do the first day they're back to work? You're back on the saddle. We expect full performance, no problems. I can send you out of town. I can have you work nights. We don't even think about what did they just go through. There's no return to work light duty. Again, we should be treating them the same. Why not? So if somebody needs to go after an injury to the doctor for therapy 1 day a week, as an employer and as an industry, we should allow that and not make it sound like, what's wrong with you? If somebody on the other hand says, hey, I got to see my therapist or psychiatrist, we look at it like, what's your problem? You know, we just got to quit treating these things differently. So another example is, again, I would look at union reps and employers. A call comes into the union hall for an employee to have to work out of town or work 7/10s or whatever, where it's really demanding. Person hasn't worked for a while. It's just got to be the temptation of that business rep to say, I got a job for you. Same with me if I call the hall and say, we got this tough job out of town. It's going to be 7/10s. I needed 10 people or 5 people, doesn't matter. We got to just quit throwing it out like if you either accept that or you don't have a job. Again, do we talk about, we do with skills, we say, can you run a lift? Can you sandblast? Can you hang wall covering? Can you work heights? Those are ways to make sure the person's skill fits the job. But we also need to say, are you going to have a problem going out of town? You have permission to say you can't go out of town because I want to know why, but we got to give people permission to say no to an opportunity. Too often, it's just an either or type of situation. So then it becomes lose-lose. Next slide. So here's some resources, and I'll tell you that the one I have first is the best one there. You guys have excellent resource, IUPAT Helping Hand. There's some excellent information there, but here's some others. American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Very good organization. They have great information on their website. National Institute on Mental Health. Again, excellent resource. National Alliance on Mental Illness. Suicide Prevention Resource Center. Now, many states and many localities have chapters of American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and National Alliance on Mental Illness. So I would encourage you in your areas to check into those potential state or local resources. And again, a reminder, the suicide hotline, 800-273-8255, or text home 741-741. Any questions? I've covered a lot of information. Typically that's half a day, but hopefully you have a better understanding of mental illness, a better understanding of some clues or warning signs to suicide, and a better understanding of how you can play a role in preventing a suicide. And I just stress terminology. People don't commit suicide, they die by suicide. And these illnesses are treatable. We can all play a role in that. So thanks for the time.
Does anyone have any questions or anything they'd like to share with Bob?
Thank you, Bob.
Is
Very
George
powerful.
on yet or not, Mike?
I'm not aware that he is on yet.
Okay, I got done a little early.
Alice, is George queued up?
I don't think he's not on just yet. He's expected around 3:40.
Okay.
So do you want to start, and then we'll when we see him on, I'll just interrupt.
Well, but if I'm going to start, I'm going to finish and then turn it over to George.
Not a problem. That's what we'll have to do.
Okay. So put up my screen and be ready to go.
Hang on, let me just put it up.
So we're going to cover a few things that we covered with both Bob and Luke and the inception. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the IUPAT Helping Hand and what we're doing currently, what we've done, and Helping Hand moving forward into the future. We're at a wonderful time for IUPAT Helping Hand right now. We've developed a blueprint. We've developed a 10 steps to implementation plan through our task force team. And we're currently in the process of having conversations with our general vice presidents in Canada and in the United States. And also through that, we'll be reaching out to all the BMSTs and the DOTs in this implementation process. So again, thank you all for being here and hearing what Helping Hand and Changing the Culture is about. And having these discussions will only help us during these implementation process. We believe that we're building a foundation that will last for generations to come. And it's much like safety, how safety first started. I came into the floor covering industry in 1978. I'm a member of Local 1238 in Seattle, in District Council 5. When I think back on what safety was like back in 1978, I don't recall that safety was an issue. A hard hat wasn't an issue. Safety glasses weren't discussed. And I can think of many times that we sanded floors without any protection whatsoever. So we've come a long way with safety. And now we're building this for mental health, suicide, and substance use disorder. But recent studies in the United States Center for Disease Control and the Canadian Association for Suicide Prevention reported that the construction industry in both the United States and Canada suffer the highest suicide rates compared to all other industries. If you can do my next page, please, Alice, slide 2. So there were staggering statistics for both countries. And Bob mentioned this also. In 2018, over 48,000 Americans died by suicide. That's an average of 132 suicides a day. In Canada, there were over 4,000 deaths by suicide, with an average of 10 people a day. Suicide 3 times higher among men compared to women. A third of the deaths by suicide are among young people, 45 to 59 years old. And suicide is the second leading cause of death among youth and young adults, 15 to 34 years old. For every suicide, there are 25 attempts. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States and the 9th leading cause in Canada overall. The rate of suicide is highest in the middle age, white men in particular. Slide 3. So we all know that, and it's widely accepted, that construction work is the most physically challenging and stressful work in the employment industry. It's difficult, it's taxing work. It doesn't matter what craft or trade you're talking about, it's hard on the body. And no one will dispute that fact. Workers are looking for relief from the pain caused by the daily, weekly, monthly, yearly grind that they go through. Of course, it can start out innocently enough with a slight irritation to some body part and a trip to the doctor to get some relief, and then the cycle begins. For some, it can spiral out of control, and then the cycle continues. Doctors are prescribing 3 times more opioids than they did in 1999. Any of us who have had a serious injury and experienced a trip to the pharmacist to pick up our prescription for a narcotic or an opioid to relieve the pain, it's obvious where this can lead. The beginning of a worker caught up in the cycle who finds themselves addicted, facing self-incrimination and stigma. It can become a hole difficult to dig out of. Many of us face it alone without hope of someone, anyone, just to recognize the situation and come alongside with an outstretched helping hand. If a construction worker can't get on the job because of a pain or injury, then they just don't get paid. The basic fact has greatly contributed to the rise in the use of opioids and other prescription drugs to treat pain, so men and women in the trades can get in another day of work despite their injuries. Unfortunately, this has led to some tragic numbers in the construction industry when it comes to substance use disorder, drug abuse, addiction, and the loss of life. Recent studies found that opioids account for 20% of total spending on prescription drugs in the construction industry. That's 5 to 10% greater than that of other industries. An estimated 11.6% of full-time construction workers, that's 1.1 million people, have used illicit drugs within the past month. An average of 115 Americans die every day from opioid overdose, and more than 10,300 Canadians lost their lives to opioids in less than 3 years, from January 2016 to September 2018. Next slide. Let that just sink in for a minute. 11 of our members died by suicide in 2018. So in preparation for this last year's FIF, I contacted George Gallus because I was wondering, did we have any statistics on how many of our members had died by suicide? And George got back to me, and he said, Mike, this is what we have. And it's staggering to think of how many of our members and their families have suffered from going through the the pain of suicide. And it really does put it into perspective. When a coworker, a friend, or a family member or acquaintance dies by suicide, it creates a ripple effect that jolts us at our foundation. We heard Bob today talk about that loss of a loved one. And I'd like to thank both Bob and Luke for their testimonies today. And it's really through our life testimonies and experiences that we can bring out these issues and we can support and help others. So Bob and Luke, a sincere thank you for the work that you do for suicide and drug issues. So slide 5. So the IUPAT recognized that there was a real issue with this, and we decided to take action. At the Finishing Industry Forum, FIF, in 2017, the IUPA acknowledged opioid crisis and suicide in the construction industry, and we hosted a work group forum. Over 130 people attended that forum in Las Vegas on substance use disorder and suicide prevention. Maybe some of you were there. There was open and frank dialogue from both labor and management about substance use and suicide issues faced in the councils and the businesses throughout North America. And we had an opportunity to hear from Bob and other experts in the field. And then we broke into some work groups. And we prioritized some action items: survey, media, and curriculum. And we determined that we would build on those issues. So then a labor management task force work group was convened. We developed an action plan and we presented it to the GEB. Upon approval by the GEB, the action items were moved forward back to the task force for further development and rollout. So we recognized we had to take action for this awareness. And the committee took action on 3 primary goals at that particular time: to launch the IUPAT Helping Hand website that all members, families, and friends of the IUPAT could access to find help and resources for treatment. And I really do hope that you've had an opportunity to take a look at that website. As Bob had mentioned, there's lots of great resources on there. Then we did recognize that we needed to create a curriculum to erase and ease the stigma of seeking help. And then we needed to launch the curriculum through the Train the Trainer course and provide online access to that. And we accomplished all 3 of those goals. Slide 6. The survey. Did our members and our employers know that there was help available? That was our first question that we asked ourselves. So we conducted a survey of nearly 3,000 contractors and IUPAT members on their awareness of union and employer programs to help them with substance use and mental health issues. Unfortunately, a third of the contractors surveyed and over half of the members who responded didn't know that help for these challenges were available either through their EAP, their Employee Assistance Program affiliated with their councils, or through their health and welfare programs. Surveys confirmed that we had work to do in providing services and to our members and employers. On the PowerPoint, you see the lack of awareness to the employee assistance programs throughout the district councils. Only 44% of members are aware of programs available for mental health, suicide, and substance use disorder. More important is that 61% of members would utilize those services if they had recognized that they were available. So again, we recognize that we had work to do in making this aware to our members and employers. So how would we do that? Slide 7. So we knew we needed to develop an awareness program, and through that, the IUPA Helping Hand was launched. It's an online resource that provides background on why suicide and substance use disorder are hitting the construction industry so hard. It lists warning signs to look out for in a coworker or a loved one who may be suffering through a mental health situation. And you'll find all the national call center numbers for the United States and Canada in suicide prevention. And that means finding treatment for substance use disorder also. There are resource materials and toolbox talks to download and distribute and post in locations such as your union halls, the training center, council offices, employee warehouses, and any location where a member would see this information. So not only is it important that awareness resources reach the members through the training and council locations, but we also ask our employers to come alongside of us to support the IUPAT Helping Hand initiative. Employers can be the first to recognize that a member may be struggling with a problem of some kind. Signs are not hidden. Absenteeism, decrease in productivity, social distancing, and physical signs of substance use are just some of the indications that a member is struggling and in need of support. The employer can become an extremely important component in recognizing and supporting the member with substance use and mental health issues. Members spend a majority of their time under the eyes of the employer's leadership staff. And in many cases, this is where the first indication of a problem can be exposed. This is when the member can receive intervention and the services necessary to receive the help needed. We can then assist with peer advocacy to come alongside what could become a critical situation. And what is a peer advocate? That's a trusted individual with compassion, empathy, a servant's heart, and a willing passion to give their time to their fellow members. As the district councils develop their Helping Hands task force teams, we recommend that this be a point of discussion. But first, the task force will need to take steps to build the council's foundation through labor management collaboration. We'll talk more about that in building our next steps. Slide 8. So curriculum, changing the culture of construction. The curriculum was adapted from other proven programs and implemented at the training center in 2018. Training is designed to inform and empower all IUPAT members by separating fact from fiction and encouraging our workforce to make healthy decisions when it comes to substance use and seeking mental health support. The goal is to educate individuals, in turn promoting a healthy, safe, and substance-free working environment. In 2019, the curriculum became an online course for district councils in the United States and Canada to teach in all IUPAT training centers in North America. And you'll find that information in the LMS. The Changing the Culture of Construction Training is the foundation of the IUPAT Helping Hand initiative. Training and awareness will save the lives of IUPAT members for generations to come. And that is something that we can all count on. Slide 9. So, in plotting out our future for our next steps, implementation of changing the culture of construction in the councils with the goal of giving members and district council representatives the skill set to recognize when a coworker or anyone else in their life may be struggling with suicide, use disorder, or mental health issues. Utilization of the LMS, Changing the Culture of Construction training. Development of a council helping hand task force team to manage and build the district council program. This team will be led by the BMST and supported by an employer co-chair. And that is where the 10 steps begin. Implementation takes hold. Awareness is critical. At every Changing the Culture of Construction training center, I ask how many aware of the IUPAT Helping Hand initiative. And sadly, and I'm hoping the numbers are going up, only a few in attendance raise their hand. We must continue to discuss substance use and suicide issues and support the members and employers throughout all councils of the IUPAT. especially now while we are building the Helping Hand initiative in all the councils. So a labor management task force made up of members from each region of the IUPAT has been convened, and we meet on a monthly basis to discuss the foundation that's being started. We listen to the needs of the councils and continue to build on the foundation developed. The group will provide leadership and support to the councils and training centers as we move into building the IUPAT Helping Hand initiative throughout all our IUPAT district councils. Currently, right now, conversations are happening with our general vice presidents and shortly with the BMST as to exactly what that looks like. And I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity to see the 10 steps of implementation, but those 10 steps will afford every council to become a certified IUPAT Helping Hand council. But all this can't happen without all of our support. Your participation in the webinar today is the first step in moving IUPAT Helping Hand and the support resources forward to the members of your council. You've heard me mention stigma, and I know Bob and Luke have both mentioned stigma today several times. In closing, I'd like to leave this with you. Stigma is the mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person. We're talking about valuable and loved people that need to be raised up above these attached labels, so they feel comfortable and safe in coming forward to receive the medical and mental health support needed to be the person they desire to be, not the labels attached that bring condemnation. Yes, it's difficult. It can be a difficult situation to be as a coworker and an employer, but we're embarking on a cultural change that's making it easier for those in substance use and mental health to come forward, to accept and receive the help that they need and desire, removing that stigma. It's our compassion and our care that'll help to lead them forward. When they're ready to come forward, trust will have been built, and it'll make it easier for them to take that leap of faith. And this is what IUPAT Helping Hand is all about. Helping our members, our employers, and their families to get through these difficult times. Our hope is that through the Changing the Culture of Construction training and the IUPAT Helping Hand resources, that you would be inspired to move this forward in all your councils and training centers. And adding mental health is an important component to the services that are already provided in our district councils and our training centers. So I want to thank you all for being here today. And wondering, do you have any questions or concerns that you'd like to bring forward at this time? Okay, with that, I see that George is on the line. George, do you have, there you are, George. Good to see you. I'd like to welcome you here today, and we're looking forward to hearing from you in what's happened in the district council.
So it was 4 or 6 weeks ago, myself and my staff took this actual course that you're doing right now. And when we got done, we decided to enroll it immediately to our apprentices since we were doing the online learning because of the COVID. So in doing so, one of our apprentices, actually a lot of our apprentices had brought up a lot of discussion about different things, the drugs, not so much depression, but drugs, how it affects the workplace, stuff like that, and things like that. And then one of our apprentices just randomly texted our instructor saying, "Hey, I'm going to be taking a medical leave for a little bit. I'll let you know when I get back." And we didn't ask any questions. When he came back, it was about 3 weeks later. He joined the class, and in the middle of the Zoom meeting class, he asked if he can speak to the entire class about a different topic. And the instructor had no clue what he was talking about. So the instructor said, yeah, as long as it's related to what we were going over. So he opens up and he goes that he was gone for 3 weeks because he had a issue with depression because of the COVID and being isolated away from he's a single man, young, 20s, living at home. He wasn't working, and he was actually on the verge of suicide. After taking the course, he realized that there was help out there, and that's why he sought medical attention and decided to put himself into a facility for the 3 weeks till he got better. And he just wanted to let everybody know in his class that, it is serious. Take the time. Don't, bottle it up. There's people out there to help. And he actually thanked the instructor for this course because otherwise he would have never, he might not be here right now. So that's really, so I forwarded that story on to the International. He did say he'd write his story in his own words to submit it to the International. I have not received it yet from him, but I'm actually looking forward to hear his version written out. So
That's quite a story, George. And
you still there?
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great story, and that's a wonderful testimony to how the awareness of Helping Hand and the work of changing the culture of construction can help and support our members and bring them forward to seek the help that they recognize that they need. So I'm so happy that he felt that was something that he could share, because I'm thinking that that's not an easy thing to share. It's not an easy thing to talk about those issues that are happening inside of us, and removing that stigma, allowing us to talk freely is an important part of that healing process. So.
Yes, it was. And he's actually a 4th-year apprentice ready to journey out. So he's been in the program for a while, and he knows what it's like to be in the union, what it means and the brotherhood and all that. So I think that was another reason why. So
as this begins to take hold into our councils now, this training will bring about opportunities that will allow you, all of you, to make a decision to be a part of that system within your own councils and train changing the culture of construction. Be a part of the work group that you'll be building within your councils to be an asset in developing and completing those 10 steps of implementation into the council. And that's really what we're looking to do. And once that happens, then your councils will be recognized as an IUPA certified Helping Hand council. I can put this if I can. Let's see if I can get this up quickly here. I think we're okay for time. I'm going to see if I can't. Share my screen with you here. Screen 2. Can you all see this on my screen now? So
Yes.
These are the 10 steps, and Bob, I encourage you to step in. Bob has been a real asset to helping this work group, made up of about 8 of us or so from district councils throughout North America, in developing these 10 steps. And Simon Hazelwood also, I think, are the 2 members of the task force that are on the call today. So as we begin this process, moving forward in completing these 10 steps, you will also receive a IUPAT toolkit that will be delivered to your councils that will have resources and information to be utilized within the council, such as posters, and you'll have information cards as to where the suicide prevention and local services are available. And you'll be able to post those in your training centers and staff offices. And as we move down here, we're asking.
Can I ask a question here? Is if some of that information in the toolkit is going to have Canadian content for the district councils north of the border?
Yes, it will have Canadian content. The posters are for the United States councils and also for the Canadian councils. So the Canadian councils will get the Canadian toolbox, and the councils in the United States will get those directed specifically for the U.S. resources. Bob or Simon, do you have anything that you'd like to contribute?
This is Bob, Mike. I think it's critical not to necessarily go 1 through 10. It may be you hit a barrier somewhere and you jump to, like everything, try to pick off the ones that you can get done, and some require a little more attention. But as a retired contractor, it's really critical to get your employers involved also, because this is not a us and them issue, it's an industry issue. It affects everybody in the industry. So I'd encourage you to look at it in that way. And the other thought, oftentimes with safety, it used to be, well, how are we going to integrate that into our training programs? I think if you look at this where you sprinkle it in all the time. So George, the example you gave us is excellent. So maybe you weren't talking about mental health issues, but it became part of the day, part of the training that given day. You know, we do it with safety all the time. We don't just do safety and then it's over with. We integrate safety when we're talking about wall coverings and ladders and talking about just layout of your work. And we can do the same with mental health issues. And just also, as an instructor, I used to teach apprentices a long time ago. You just check in with people. How you doing when they show up in the morning? And the question I had, George, was this individual, was anything apparent? Probably not with Zoom, but that's a disadvantage. But a lot of times, just the way a person displays themselves and what they're saying is kind of telling us that, hey, something's not right. You know, so I just throw out those thoughts.
Bob, I appreciate what you're saying there. And one thing I really want to say for at least myself, being in the at the state that I'm at right now, I agree with you of not having to have 1 to 10 points here checked off to become a certified. I don't think the certification to get this information out to our members is the imperative portion. The imperative portion is just getting the information out to our members in whatever way it takes. A checklist is fine, but without the actual information getting to our members, I think it has to be brought back to the basics. Your story touched me today. I've got stories of my own that have been impactful, not only for me, but for people that I know. And this is a near and dear thing to my heart. So I wanted to say thank you, Bob, directly for myself as well as Luke. You guys shared some really good information today. And I don't think that the checklist is the important part. It's getting this information out to the membership and getting rid of the stigma that exists in the industry.
Absolutely. Thank you, Don. Appreciate that. Does anybody else have any other comments that they'd like to bring about?
I'm sorry, go ahead. I just want to thank you, Mike, and Bob and Luke, and this is an extremely important topic that needs to be shared with all of our members, and all of our district councils need to jump on board with this training. And again, thank you. It was a fantastic presentation, and I look forward to seeing it take off. That's it.
All right. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Alice for some closing instructions. And I want to thank you all. We look forward to bringing changing the culture of construction and helping hand into your district councils. And it's go time. We're there right now. So thank you again.
Before I conclude, Mike Sylvia, I think he sounded like he wanted to make a comment. Would you still like to make a comment?
Yeah, so many of us are affected by this in so many different ways. Throughout my life, I've dealt with like suicide. I've known my wife 30 years. She had a cousin who ended life with suicide. One of our brothers from local Union 660 was one of the 11 guys you were talking about in 2018. So yeah, I think getting this out there is something that needs to be done. And I think it's a great course, and I think it will help a lot more people than we actually see physically getting helped. I think it's a great tool.
So, Alice, can you put my, let's see here. Stop the share here. Can you put my information back up on the screen with my phone number and my email address? So if anybody would like to talk in more detail about the Helping Hand Initiative and any other issues that you have, my phone number and my email address are there. I'd be happy to talk to you about it and go into a little bit more detail about what it looks like to build the Helping Hand team and maybe what you envision your role could be in that in your councils. So also with our Helping Hand Task Force team that we have at the international level, there are representatives, at least 2 representatives for every region in Canada on the task force team. So with that, thank you, Alice. Now I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, so again, I thought it was a great class, lots of great participation and feedback. And I just want to remind everyone to go on to the LMS. FTI 1141 is the course code to take the live instruction survey and provide us your feedback about today's session. And the webinar has been recorded, and we will be posting that usually on a link to our YouTube page. So thank you again, stay safe, and feel free to contact Mike if you have any additional questions. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks, everyone.